Thank you very much for your nice words welcoming me, sirs, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure and a great honor to be invited today and to give lecture to you. I know that you speak and understand pretty well English, but now the big challenge for you will be to understand my French-English accent. But we will go through, I hope. So the topic I want to address to you this morning is related to the challenges we have to face related to the new command structure in NATO and more particularly facing the aircom issues. So during this presentation, I will talk quite long on the JFAC issues, and then we will speak about what we are missing right now, like intelligence and surveillance reconnaissance capabilities, and then we will have to face, otherwise, the new structure, and I will explain that. So during the last 4 years, NATO faced tremendous changes, and from an air perspective, implementation of the new NATO command structure and lessons learned from recent operations and mainly Unified Protector led to a new air organization and a new concept for the C2 structure. With regards to the organization, the NCS has been streamlined and is now leaner. As a consequence, there is only one air command for the alliance, only one, composed with one HQ located in Ramstein, in Germany, and 3 subordinate units, which are 2 KEOX in Udem and Torrejon, and 1 DAC-CC in Poggio Renatico. Likewise, the other single service commands, AirCom has been raised up to the operational level, meaning that the NCS doesn't reflect the well-known 3-layer structure anymore. And so I want to expand a little bit more on this issue. Before the new NCS, there were 2 joint force commands, one in Naples and the other one in Brunssum. 2 LANCOM, 2 MARCOM, and 2 AirCom. Each joint force command had under his authority one single service. So Brunssum had Northwood for the maritime com, Ramstein for the aircom, and the 1 LANCOM. So we had a 3-layers organization, shape, joint force command, and single service command depending on the joint force command. Today, there are 2 joint force commands, but only 1 LANCOM, 1 aircom, and 1 MARCOM. And because you cannot have 2 bosses doing the same thing, single services have been elevated at the same level than GFCs. So now we have a 2-layers organization, shape, and the joint force commands, and at the same level, the single service commands. Now, what about the consequences? AirCom, as other single service command, can talk directly with SACURE, which is brand new, and gets its orders from him and no more from the joint force command. AirCom is no more subordinate to a joint force command. All processes of planning and conducting operations have to be reviewed because of this new organization. AirCom has to uniformize procedures related to air policing on the European NATO airspace. In fact, previously, the 2 AirCom, the one in Ramstein and the other one in Izmir, in Turkey, had different processes. So now we have to be uniformized, and that's one of the big challenges of Ramstein right now. On the conceptual side, a new RC2 CONOPS has been approved in 2012 and is currently implemented and exercised. This new concept for RC2 is mainly the result of the lessons learned from OUP. And in this framework, major outcomes were the need to establish a static versus a deployable JFAC concept, enabling a more reliable and less expensive capability. There is also a need for an appropriate augmentation and supplementation plan, relying on trained and qualified personnel from the NCS and the national force structure. Finally, there is a need for developing joint ISR capabilities within NATO, reducing the dependency from the nations. Here are a few considerations just to set up the scene on where AirCom stands and what are the key challenges we have to face in the upcoming years. The first challenge I bring forward is that AirCom has a wide spectrum of missions, all in a fast-moving world and an ever-changing environment. This requires responsiveness and adaptability, which, by the way, are part of the air power characteristics. As you may know, NATO's level of ambition is a challenging one, with 2 major joint operations plus 6 small joint operations. And there is a high level of expectations, but on very scarce RC2 resources within AirCom and national JFACs. One of the biggest challenges for us is the ISR area. At the beginning of OUP, our CFAC initially had difficulties standing up an ISR division, competent in the execution of processing, exploitation, and dissemination, and we were lacking some key expertise, such as a lack of trained targeters and analysts. Because of this, the CFAC disproportionately relied on national sources of intelligence. And finally, one key lesson we identified during our last joint exercise, STESFAT JAZ exercise, was that the nature of air and space power is not well understood throughout the joint level within the NATO command structure. Outside of the air community, very few staff officers understand the process to plan and conduct air and space power. We, all together, as the collective air community, must advocate air and space power if we want to extract the best benefit out of it. So here is my agenda for this presentation. I will begin by discussing some of the challenges associated with standing up and operating a joint force air component, and this will be the big part of my lecture. I will then discuss challenges associated with information and intelligence, and finally, I will say a few words about the need to advocate for air and space power. So let's begin for the first related to the JFAC challenges. AirCom's missions are highlighted in blue, delivering air and space power for the Alliance. And AirCom's main tool for delivering air and space power effects is the JFAC. The JFAC provides the ability to execute, command, and control of air forces across the full spectrum of conflict. The JFAC must become the common working frame or the standard for how NATO nations execute command and control of air power. The size and shape of the JFAC is scalable based on the nature of the operation. A very small JFAC for a humanitarian mission, for example, or a JFAC of over 1,000 people for a major joint operation. One thing we learned from Operation Unified Protector: the JFAC should be seen as a static entity and not deploy forward. The CIS requirement are simply too great to effectively forward deploy a JFAC. It will slow down NATO response, and it is not consistent with the reactivity of air power. If called upon, AirCom will command and control air and space power from the JFAC located in the basement of our headquarters building in Ramstein, Germany. For standing up a smaller type JFAC, we do have alternate infrastructure in our KOX. For those of you that are not familiar with our standard JFAC structure, let me go through it. The strategy division is the brain globally. It's the JFAC's focal point for air-related plans development. It supports the achievement of air operational objectives, both of a kinetic and non-kinetic nature, and desired end state by developing, refining, disseminating, and assessing the JFAC air and space strategy. It initiates the air tasking cycle via guidance in the Air Operations Directive. The strategy division operates at the operational level and assesses the effectiveness and efficiency of air and space operations. Next, you have the ISR divisions, provides predictive and actionable intelligence. It's the eyes of the commander. The ISRD provides a common threat and targeting picture in order to inform the planning and execution of theater-wide air and space operations. It provides the means to measure the effects of the operation. The ISRD conducts planning, monitors execution of airborne ISR operations, and dynamically adjusts ISR plans as required to direct the JFAC's distributed and reach back ISR processes. Finally, it prepares the predictive battle space awareness and provides the current battle damage assessment. The Combat Plans Division, it's like the body if you want, develops detailed execution plans for air and space operations. It develops, the Combat Plans Division also publishes and disseminates the Air Tasking Order or the ATO, including the daily spins. It publishes and disseminates as well Airspace Control Order, the ACO, the FRAGOs, the spins, the rules of engagements, and other planning tasking documents as required, such as air defense plans, airspace control plan, C2 communications and architecture plan, OPTAX link, ISR synchronization matrix. The Combat Operation Division are like the feet, they touch the ground, which is the reality. It executes TACON over air and space assets during ATO executions. It maintains situational awareness of the battle space and constant contact with subordinate elements and assets, as well as other assets available for tasking. The Combat Ops Division responds to battlefield dynamics affecting command and control of air and missile defense operations. This is done by modifying the published ATO through adding, deleting, retargeting, or changing a sortie's mission. So it's a very short loop. It coordinates air support with appropriate component command HQs operating in the joint operating area or beyond this joint operating area as directed. Finally, the Combat Ops Division assesses the result of air operations and submits reports and recommendations to the JFAC. And then you have the Combat Service Support Divisions, which provides logistics and CIS support to the warfighter. It produces, coordinates, and executes sub-area plans to sustain the campaign. And it is responsible for coordinating the logistics effort to enable and sustain the air campaign. by identifying logistic requirements, constraints, and limitations impacting the production of the air operations plan. It plays a big role during OUP because you remember we had some problems for the base to accept, for some base to accept some fighter squadron or and so they are managing the laydown of the different assets which are operating during operations. And last, the liaisons also play an important JFAC role. These personnel are the JFAC's link to the Joint Force Task Force Headquarters and sister component. They facilitate interaction and communication between the JFAC and other HQs and component command staff. The team's composition is tailored to the mission and contains subject matter experts from intel, logistic, planning, and so on. The Air Component Coordination Element, or the ACSI, is JFAC's personal representatives to the Joint Force Commander. Since the JFAC itself is static, the ACSI will deploy with the Joint Task Force Headquarters and build the crucial link to the static JFAC. The ACSI is usually led by a Brigadier General who has both trust and ear of the JFAC commander. The Air Liaison Elements, or the AIL, are JFAC's personal representatives to his fellow component commanders. This slide provides a rough idea of how many positions are required to populate our JFAC based on the nature of the operation. Working collaboratively among HU Aircom divisions and in close liaison with our subordinate commands, the Aircom's core JFAC established the necessary positions, envisioned, and shifts for each one of the two types of operation. The Aircom JFAC consists of 375 baseline positions. When established for 24/7 operations, the number of required personnel therefore climbed to 750 versus more than 1,000 personnel for SGO, Air Heavy, and MGO. All of our three subordinate commands have dedicated personnel to build up our JFAC. Of course, most of the HQ Aircom staff will also move into a JFAC position. So in our HQ in Ramstein, we have roughly 500 people. And from these 500 people, about 300 are educated and trained to take JFAC position if required. But we are talking about huge numbers, and therefore supplementation will not be sufficient. We are currently also designing an augmentation plan to reinforce our JFAC from the NFS. And the NFS means National Force Structure. It means all the forces which are inside NATO countries, but not inside NATO by itself. As you know, RC2 is very demanding in terms of competence, and ideally nations should provide us with knowledgeable, trained personnel. I said ideally, but we therefore must have a structured training plan to educate and train personnel for each JFAC position. The left side of the slide illustrates our individual training. Each JFAC newcomer undertakes induction training for 2 days, followed by initial functional training course, or the IFJT, in Poggio Renatico. And finally, his training needs to be completed with a mission qualification training at home station. A unique MQT plan exists for each operational establishment position in the JFAC. So there is a baseline for this MQT. However, it can be tailored to the individual background, and therefore it can be slightly different for each individual. The right side of the slide illustrates our collective training, which complements individual training. This is done through our exercises, and supplementary training is provided when deemed necessary, with attendance at specific courses for training on some more complex C2 function. And I will highlight, for example, time-sensitive targeting or the PR, which is the joint personal recovery. For the next slide, it depicts some of our training challenges. As I already mentioned, the NCS JFAC may need augmentees from the national force structure in order to execute command and control. This requires that the national force structure be trained to a certain level and also standardized with our JFAC SOPs. To meet this requirement, our training concept covers 3 pillars: training of aircom personnel, training of external, and tracking trained resources. We are working to ensure these 3 pillars are standardized and harmonized. With standards, trained personnel, and a robust management system, it should be possible to generate a properly manned and trained JFAC. However, there are frictions which will make this task challenging. The first one is the scale. It is a big problem with hundreds of staffs to be trained and managed every year. Then the constant turnover. A 3-year posting cycle means constant stress on the training system. Then the complexity. There are national sensitivities, and there may be some cultural or political considerations for information to be shared. Then the timing. There's a lot going on with induction training, initial functional training, and mission qualification training. It takes a lot of time to properly train an individual. And all this has a cost. And as you know, large numbers of countries in NATO are facing funding problems. And because you know that in NATO, the per diem when you are on TDY is a national concern, we are facing now some countries which are not given the per diem necessary to properly train. So we have to face this challenge as well. With this understanding of training, let's move on to how we actually build a JFAC. A large number of additional personnel beyond our core JFAC are required to establish a full JFAC in support of air operations. As a standing HQ, AirCom has a PE of 500 personnel, 40 of whom work in the core JFAC. A core JFAC is quite different from a standing JFAC. A standing JFAC, you have one in Ramstein, which is the 603rd. This is a US one. It is a standing because it is a 24/7 JFAC operating for some operations that the US are dealing with. A core JFAC is a core of personnel which are not conducting any operations, but they are really aware of what is needed in case of this JFAC should be activated. On demand, HQ Aircom personnel will form the bulk of our JFAC and will move from their permanent position to their JFAC position. So, as I said previously, HQ Aircom will also supplement the JFAC with 320 personnel coming from KEOC UDEM, KEOC Torrejon, and the DACCC Poggio Renatico. This would allow us to man a SGO and no more. And we have also the option to augment with the national force structure. And for an MGO, the rest of the required personnel will have to be augmented from nations to grow our JFAC up to more than 1,000 positions. This work provides the manning for a single JFAC and a single operation. We will now look at the NATO level of ambition. As I mentioned before, the alliance level of ambition is challenging. 6 small joint operations plus 2 major joint operations. The augmentation process from a pre-identified trained pool is key to this level of ambition. Again, NATO does rely on national JFACs to assist, especially for the NRF mission. For our own NCS JFAC, we aim at augmentation from the NATO national force structure, but we want to preserve the national JFACs because they may have to stand up a JFAC for a different operation. And before establishing the augmentation requirements, it was crucial to determine a realistic number of available personnel inside the NATO command structure. For planning purposes, we assume a 90% peacetime establishment fill rate. We then determined which positions would be filled by the NCS, leaving holes that must be filled by nations. As the national augmentees must be fully trained and mission ready, their positions will be static and requested for an extended period of time in order to keep costs down as much as possible. This slide shows the summary of the positions requested to the different entities and the overall numbers for nations. When you see these numbers, you quickly understand that the alliance level of ambition of 6 SGO plus 2 MGO is an extremely large bill. This is the reason why we are looking for a strong commitment of NATO nations. On a win-win strategy, we can approach bilaterally a nation and offer JFAC position while proposing education and training courses. This slide gives an overview of which nations have a national JFAC. Apart from the US, with the 603rd Air and Space Operations Center in Ramstein, 3 nations already have a national JFAC: France, UK, and Germany. 3 others are building up their JFAC: Turkey, Spain, and Italy. Others are considering this option as well. Inside this small pool of JFACs, we need a symbiosis about training, mutual sharing, harmonization of procedures, and exchange of experience. And to build relationships with the NFS JFACs, the following tools have been introduced. The first one is the semi-annual JFAC coordination group meetings, which are hosted by the HQ AirCom and deals with cooperation and standardization among the JFAC. The last meeting took place in October 2013. Then we have a JFAC handbook. This handbook will ensure standard processes across the JFACs. However, each JFAC could have their own local supplement. And as previously discussed, qualification training programs will be developed in coordination with all JFACs. During exercises, we offer some positions to the national JFACs to fill. This provides valuable training and experience sharing. We are coordinating with all 6 national JFACs to ensure their participation in Ramstein Ambition 2, which takes place in early June 2014. In the NRF certification process, AirCom has an active role to play. AirCom assesses the national JFAC's readiness during the NRF preparation phase. And AirCom is developing a mentoring plan to assist them. So the French JFAC will be evaluated during Noble Row 14 and Steadfast Juncture and Steadfast Juncture 14 as well. And finally, as previously discussed, the real-world JFAC manning supplementation and augmentation plan. This was my big part, and now I will go to the information that leads us to the second part of my presentation. And one of the OUP lessons learned is that NATO was heavily reliant on national assets and national chains for intelligence. The nations do not usually produce intelligence at the relevant NATO level or tier line products they already have on the shelf. NATO has to issue formal requests for intelligence, or sometimes information is informally collected by individuals contacting their national agencies. In addition, as the request for intelligence process requires the request to go through a number of brokers, verifies are liable to be misinterpreted. These processes are slow and do not meet the requirement. In the intel area, NATO needs an organic collection capability different from the one the nations provide. That's why the AGS Air-Ground Surveillance Program has been agreed to be funded by some of the alliance members. The AGS program is a 1.3 billion euros procurement program involving 15 nations. The following equipment will be bought: 5 Global Hawks, and you know that the Global Hawk is a combat-proven HAIL UAV with extraordinary ISR capabilities, providing near real-time resolution imagery of large geographical areas all day and night in all types of weather. We will have C2 shelters used for launching and recovering the air vehicle from Sigonella or forward operating air bases. The main operating base will be at Sigonella, Italy, including an organic training capability dedicated for the AGS system. We'll have 6 mobile general ground stations which can optimize direct support to ground maneuver forces by providing movement detection, on-site exploitation capability, and liaison support. 2 transportable general ground stations that can provide both exploitation correlation support and act as a liaison asset with supported operational level commands. It is envisaged that a general ground station may be tacked on to a supported commander. It provides robust imagery analysis, access to the intel processes, support to the targeting cycle, and liaison functions to ensure that AGS is meeting the supported commander's requirements. And some areas are requiring further development. Tactics, techniques, and procedures have not been developed yet. Training requirements and standards needs to be finalized. There is no standardization, evaluation authority protocol, and tasking and employment consideration need to be addressed. However, one must realize the AGS marks significant progress for NATO as far as intel is concerned, but it will not solve all of the ISR needs of JFAC will have. Indeed, AGS only represents a part of the comprehensive joint ISR initiative. Joint ISR is what we are looking for, and it includes equipment, so the AGS, but also education and training as well as processes. This will enable NATO and the JFAC to exploit the full range of ISR capabilities. Air power is complex by essence, and to run NATO air operations, AirCom, especially when forming a JFAC, needs a wide variety of C2 systems and functionalities. I do not want to go too much into details, and I'll try to be simple in my comments. ICC, which means Integrated Command and Control, is the current legacy system, which is widely used in NATO and national entities. It provides the main C2 tools for tasking and executing NATO air operations, and is interfaced with some other tools like the NEC CCIS, which are specific modules. ICC evolved. It is a reliable experience system, but it is approaching the end of its working life. RC2IS is a new modern C2 system, contracted in 2010 to provide a non-real-time set of tools for planning in a joint environment. It is part of the NATO BSC IES program and heavily interfaced with other core and functional services. Its development is still under progress. RC2IS will be the upper layer of planning tools between strategic HQ, joint HQs, and single service HQs. ACS, Air Command and Control System, is designed to provide the tactical level to CRCs and KEOCs with real-time and non-real-time planning and execution functionalities. ACS will be used for air policing, air defense, and BMD. The challenge for NATO will be the compatibility of these different C2 tools, the management of databases, and the reliability in information exchange. In the end, we, as airmen, have the vision, or the dream, I should say, that these systems will combine into one single RC2 system. But this would be extremely beneficial for operations and training. Unfortunately, due to the fact that RC2IS is Windows-based while ACS is not, and that both are developed by different contractors, we are still far from making this dream a reality. This is a big challenge. Finally, a few words on the importance of strategic messaging. I have discussed the issues of the JFAC, from ensuring people are properly trained to relying on nations to play a critical role in filling the holes. I also discussed issues with NATO intelligence and our challenge of bringing the AGS online. I would like to close by saying a few words about air and space power advocacy. Airmen understand the importance of air power, the unique tenets of air power, but much of the NCS and NFS entities do not. It's a reality. We learned very quickly during our planning and execution of Steadfast Jazz exercise last year that our joint partners were not as educated on the deployment of air power as they should be to provide us with a solid basis of joint planning that we need in the JFAC. Just take a look at the flag officers positioned in Joint Force Commands, Brunsum and Naples. Just a couple of them are airmen. Not enough to have influence on joint planning. For example, the joint level needs to be aware of the crucial role of the targeting process and the joint prioritized target list, as well as the joint coordination. I firmly believe that we, as airmen, must work harder to educate our joint partners so that air power can be truly integrated into joint war fighting. We learned many lessons from Steadfast Jazz. First, the joint planning process brings the air component into the planning process way too late. We must be a part of the development of military response options already, so that the military strategic and joint level understand what air power can and cannot provide in a specific scenario. For that, the Comprehensive Operations Planning Directive, also known as the COPD, must reflect the new NCS. That is to say that single service commands are at the same level that the GFCs and should be part of the planning process. Furthermore, our joint partners must understand that gaining at level of air superiority will not only save lives, but also provide the freedom of action to execute their ground maneuvers. The shortfall is not our joint partners. The shortfall is that we haven't taken the time and energy to make them more air power savvy. As a summary, you can see that even though AirCom is moving forward, implementing main conclusions and recommendations from previous operations and exercises, there are still challenges to be worked out. I mentioned education and training, standardization and procedures, supplementation and augmentation, joint integration, ISR and capabilities, RC2 systems, and obviously, as a driving factor, air and space advocacy. In this time of transformation and on our way to the full operational capability declaration we expect by the end of this year, we have to count on nations and on the air community to succeed. And so I count on Norway to help us. You have a very capable and reliable Air Force, educated military personnel, and a strong commitment for NATO. So thank you very much for the invitation to address this audience and your attention during my presentation. And now if we have time, I don't know, I'll be ready for any Q&As if you have some.